Oh. It does that all the time. Or I'm just, yeah. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Welcome to City Talk. It's midday here in not so sunny Toronto, kind of overcast Toronto, and apparently we're going to get snow, just so that the mayor of Winnipeg can feel that he's not the only person that has to deal with unpredictable weather. And we're very happy to have the mayor of Winnipeg, Brian Bowman, with us from Winnipeg and from the Central Time Zone. And we're looking forward to having another really fruitful conversation, one-on-one with the mayor on the front lines in Canada. I'm just going to provide a bit of background for people while people sign into the Zoom function. First of all, the Canadian Urban Institute's in the connected tissue business. And this is what we were trying to do with all the platforms we've put up since COVID. So we have 3 of them: citywatchcanada.ca, citysharecanada.ca, and now this one, citytalkcanada.ca. And it's all about sharing information and data and examples of improvisation and resourceful ways that municipalities and their partners, institutions, communities, businesses are responding during COVID to improve our resilience. And these City Talk series have been really, really useful, I think, in terms of helping us make sense of what's going on and derive some meaning. But we are very conscious that this, while we're doing this, thousands and thousands of Canadians are still on the front lines, trying to save lives and keep people safe and healthy. And so these conversations are in no way intended to supplant that or be a distraction from that even. We are always supportive of what our colleagues, and particularly people that work in municipalities like Mayor Bowman's, are doing to keep us safe. We originate this broadcast in Toronto, and Toronto is on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. We're also cognizant that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Anishinaabeg nations. And we always try to be as cognizant of that as we can. And I'm anticipating that Mayor Bowman will talk to us a lot about part of the experience in Winnipeg, and particularly for Indigenous and other vulnerable communities. So we'll be interested to hear what you're going to tell us about that. City Talk is intended to be a beginning of a conversation, not the end. We can never do anything in 45 minutes or an hour, obviously. So please join us on the chat box. And you'll see there's a chat function here. The mayor can see it as well. But he and I are going to chat back and forth, and then I will feed in periodically questions that come from the chat. Or Mayor Bowman, if you can multitask, you're free to see what they're saying too. And we also encourage people to use Twitter. Use hashtag CityTalk, and then our discussion with the mayor will be posted online at CanUrb, and you can read about it there. And we also, the other thing we found historically with these chats, that people have very robust conversations, not just with the panelists, but with each other on the chat. So unlike in Vegas, just remember, you put something up on the chat, it stays there, and we will post it. So we are finding these to be really fruitful. And so we encourage you to use the chat to problem solve with each other and put up resources and ask the mayor direct questions as you like. And the other thing is, when you're doing the chat, could you just adjust your little toggle switch there? You'll see you can do it to all panelists, which in this case is one, or you can do it to everybody. We'd prefer you do all panelists and everyone, because often people in the chat answer each other's questions more quickly than anybody on the panel can. We have been fortunate to have a few other mayors here, Mayor Bowman, and we are appreciative that municipalities have been on the front lines from the beginning. It's really literally where the rubber has hit the road. It's a poignant day for us. You and I were just talking about this. It's the 75th anniversary of VE Day, when a previous generation came to terms with an extraordinary challenge, rose to it, and our lives were changed forever. And I'm wondering if we're at that moment again. So I'm going to invite you to just tell us a bit if you can. We've got listeners from across the country, as you know, and we also get international people tuning in. So you may just have to bring us up to speed a little bit on what's it been like in Winnipeg, what are the pressing challenges, and just tell us a bit about your experience, could you?
Sure. It's nice to see you again, Mary, and thanks for having me. And thanks to the Canadian Urban Institute for ongoing leadership that you provide pre and during a pandemic. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. A couple acknowledgements. Firstly, I'm coming to you from Treaty 1 territory in the traditional homeland of the Métis. Winnipeg is a place where we have the largest Indigenous community in Canada, and we're very proud of that. And also, of course, welcome people from all over the world. Although less people come in there right now, of course, because of the travel restrictions. But a couple just national acknowledgements as well. I do want to, for those that may be joining us from Nova Scotia, I want to offer our support. I know it's been a difficult few weeks. I had a conversation with Mayor Savage last week, along with many other mayors, and I know many are hurting, and we're sharing in that grief as Canadians, as are members of the Canadian Armed Forces as well. And so, on a brighter note, I want to wish all the moms a happy Mother's Day in advance. What's going on here is we've been fairly fortunate. Manitoba Health has been doing great work, and we have not been impacted with infections or deaths at the rates that we've seen elsewhere in the country, fortunately. But it is here. There is community transmission, and we have been affected as a municipality by the provincial health orders. Like other municipalities across Canada, we're playing a supportive role to support the efforts of Manitoba Health. And it's been a trying time for everybody. I think just on personal and professional levels, this is a unique time in our country's history. I think global history. My wife and I have two young boys. They're 12 and 9. They're at home. They're being homeschooled by Tracy, and Tracy's also working full time from home as well. And the multitasking there is remarkable. And I think everyone's feeling a certain degree of anxiety, to differing levels. I think people are being challenged in terms of their mental and physical health and their spiritual health. And as municipal leaders, we're trying to do what we can with the tools that we have. Of course, we have closed facilities here, and I can get into that if you'd like, but we've closed our libraries. They're still closed. We've closed our community centers. We have had our own local state of emergency, which we've now lifted, not because we aren't in a pandemic, but rather the tools that we have as a municipality, we believe are sufficient going forward. But beyond that, Mayor Iveson told me when I was first elected, I remember chatting with Don, and he said, you don't have a lot of power as mayor, but you do. You have the platform, and you have the ability to convene. And so what you've, I think, seen in Toronto, I think Mayor Tory's doing outstanding work using the platform of the office of the mayor to communicate information that helps protect the safety and well-being of our residents. And we're dealing with the financial challenges of antiquated financial tools and the expectations of our citizens to provide those services that they need when they need them. We're also dealing with the ability to bring people together, and so it's been a challenging time. I've certainly felt anxiety about the what's going on right now in the state of the world, and have tried to communicate a broader message that in Winnipeg, we don't have snow here today, but the other 364 days of the year in Winnipeg, we do have snow. Yeah, absolutely. And so the one thing we do know about in Winnipeg is we know how to weather storms. And so we are a community that has pretty adverse weather in winter. We face storms, whether they're blizzards, whether they're floods. We had our ice storm last fall, and now we're in a pandemic, and we'll weather the storm and we'll come out stronger than before. And I think that's the experience across Canada, is as Canadians, we will weather the storm. we will come out stronger, and it's looking for opportunities to support our most vulnerable, to support businesses, and to come out stronger. And we will as a nation. I'm really proud to be a Canadian right now. I think all levels of government are doing their best. Our not-for-profit and our business community are doing outstanding work, including, of course, the Canadian Urban Institute.
Thank you. Well, we're pleased to have you acknowledge that, because we feel like you do, that we want to try to create the opportunities for us to all learn from each other. And as you say, all boats rise as we do. We had Mayor Savage with us a week ago today, and we had that kind of a conversation, that it's not just one challenge. He's had a compounding and then a compounding and a compounding, and we have parts of the country that are going to be facing flooding, spring flooding, or wildfires, or all sorts of other kinds of just day-to-day challenges. So part of what we've been wondering about is, what has COVID exposed for you in Winnipeg? Our sense is that there are pre-existing conditions that seem to have been accelerated or exacerbated or made worse. Tell us what you're seeing there in terms of that kind of thing, and particularly around vulnerable populations, I guess.
Probably three things that jump to mind. It's illustrated for me much more clearly than before how vulnerable our vulnerable community is. Yeah. So that's point one. So those Winnipeggers affected by homelessness or living with addictions, I've heard people say we're all in the same boat, and it's just not true. We're in the same storm, but the boats are very different. Some people have home theaters they're going home to tonight. Right. They're gonna have some Merlot, and they're gonna order in, and other people are out on the street, and so self-isolating is very different if you are living with an addiction, if you are without a home. And so I think for many Canadians, the disparity that we have in our communities and the vulnerability of the citizens and the residents that we refer to as our most vulnerable has been exposed to a much greater extent than before. And I think coming out of this, I think there'll be a lot more attention, and I hope a lot more resources going towards supporting our most vulnerable. Second point is the liquidity challenges and the narrow margins of many businesses. I mean, I just cite one industry as an example, the restaurant business. So we've seen restaurants here who are, their margins are so tight at the best of times that, there's businesses that won't reopen again. And that, the vulnerability of our business community, I think in certain sectors, there's some sectors that have been hit really hard, of course, airlines and hotels, restaurants, among many others. And then thirdly is just the antiquated revenue models for municipalities. We are frontline service, and we provide essential services, whether it's clean, safe drinking water, whether it's making sure first responders show up when you call 911, making sure that our streets and our parks remain safe. These are essential services, and the revenue tools that we have are so antiquated. We had just passed a 4-year balanced budget here in the city of Winnipeg. We'd replenished our fiscal stabilization reserve. We are losing about $12 million a month for Winnipeg, and we can weather the storm as a municipal government. Currently, based on the facts on the ground right now, we believe that we can weather this storm financially until about August. After that, we will need support of other levels of government, and we're going to continue to join FCM. We're going to continue to join other municipalities in advocating for support. But for us, we had actually positioned fairly well to weather the storm in the short term. The challenge becomes, how do you replenish the fiscal stabilization reserve when this is done? If there's a second, a third wave, or other emergency situations at this level. And we are, as most will know, within this organization, largely looking to property taxes to fill our coffers. $12 million, to put that in perspective. I know other municipalities are losing, some of the larger cities like Toronto are losing I think I've heard numbers of $65 million a week, or perhaps that's the month. It's a lot.
No, no, you're right.
And it's hard to get your head around what that means for when you hear governments and you hear millions of dollars or billions of dollars. It's easy for many people to glaze over and not put that into perspective. And $12 million for us, about $5 million is a 1% property tax increase for every homeowner in the city for the year. So $12 million is about a 2% property tax increase just to fill that up per month. So you can't double down on the burden that businesses and homeowners are taking right now and backfill that through property taxes alone. At the same time, the services we provide, we have amongst the lowest operating per capita cost for a municipal government in Canada, and so there's not a lot of fat to trim from those services. And we have squeezed a lot in our 4-year multi-year budget. So the question becomes, how do you replenish it? And yesterday I presented a 5-point recovery plan to the provincial government. One of those points is a growth-oriented funding model. So other levels of government have PST, GST, income taxes, progressive forms of taxations. They long abandoned property taxes for a reason. And it's because they gave it to us. And what I would love to do is, if we had some form of a progressive growth-oriented funding model, we would position our economic recovery around that, and we would cash in on that economic recovery in a progressive way that would replenish our coffers to provide services, but also do it in a way that isn't as regressive as property taxes is.
So let's take your three and we'll do them in reverse order. So you antiquated revenue. The second middle one was liquidity. The first one you mentioned was vulnerable. So let's talk about the money piece. We had a bunch of municipal finance experts on last week, and including the CFO from Edmonton, and they were laying it pretty stark, as you suggest, that even before COVID, you didn't have the revenue tools to generate your own revenue, and you didn't have enough transfers. And so here we are in this moment. You weren't standing on the sidelines saying, "Oh, gee, we don't have a budget for that." When people were falling ill in front of you, you had to respond and get them shelter or whatever the service was. And you've had to continue. This is particularly true for cities with big transit systems. They've got to continue to run those transit systems, but they can't have them as full. So they've got to run more, and lots of folks still have to get to work, etc. So going forward, is it this proposal you've made, and we'll make sure that we'll post that. We can post that in the chat so people can see what you're advancing. Is it a mix? Is it a mix of a different kind of relationship with the two other levels of government that do collect more taxes, as well as you generating your own revenue tools? Is it a mix?
Well, there's two efforts underway right now. FCM is leading the charge for direct funding from the federal government to support municipalities right now for their operating budgets, and that's something we're strongly supporting. This message that I released yesterday, it's a 5-point plan. It's on my social media platforms from yesterday, and we'll share it with you, Mary, so that it can be shared. That's really directed at the provincial government, because we are legal creatures of the province, and they are our provincial government, and it's not this current political party that's in office. It's long-standing. We are required under provincial
federation, I think. It's really long.
Exactly, yeah. But we're required to balance our budgets, our operating budgets, which we do, unlike the other two levels of government. We have, in our case, we have a debt ceiling. So we have a self-imposed debt policy, which I think has served us very well. It maintains our credit rating and helps provide some discipline to the politicians here at City Hall. What we're pushing for is really a commitment from the provincial government to implement a new funding model that's a growth oriented. I haven't been prescriptive for a reason, because no model is perfect. It requires dialogue, and ultimately it's the decision of the province. Some of the models are PST, GST, income tax. We had, in the previous government, they had the Building Manitoba Fund. It was basically 1% of our PST. This government canceled that so they could look at other options. They're still looking, and we're still waiting for something that is predictable and growth oriented.
Would you want to see if the whole language we have to use here is kind of archaic? You have to ask for permission. Would you like to ask for permission to run a deficit this
No.
year? You don't want to?
No, I don't think governments should run deficits. And I think our model based on municipal governments, no. Primarily because I don't think politicians over the decades can demonstrate that they can pay it back.
Right.
I've studied Keynesian economic theory. I mean, it doesn't get paid back in my experience. Yeah, I'm okay with the balanced budget. I mean, it forces discipline.
But here's the challenge with it. I mean, if you have to make a huge, big capital investment, you may not be able to do it out of your existing yearly budget. So what about borrowing from your capital reserves? Has anybody talked about that? Can you take money from, I don't know whether you're permitted to take money from capital reserves and allocate those to operations, and then can there be some other mechanism to replenish the reserves?
Yeah, it's reverse. I mean, we do cash to capital. So we transfer money from our operating to help replenish our capital, but we've squeezed our capital right to protect the operating side of the budget to do our first ever 4-year balanced budget. So it's, I think municipalities are much more fiscally conservative than other levels of government in my argument. In our case, I'd love to see provincial and federal governments balance their budgets. I'd love to see them have even debt policies. Neither do, and I've been advocating for that right now because we've been providing that leadership, and other mayors and councillors have as well. We also are the most open and transparent level of government. Our budgets, I mean, they're line by line. I mean, we're still trying to understand budgets from a few years ago that are laid out by other levels of government. So that scrutiny, I think, it's a good thing.
So it is an interesting twist you're trying to put there, that, this principle of subsidiarity, that you want the government closest to the receiver of the service to be the one that's planning it, administering it, and paying for it. And you're saying, hey, look at the way we do municipal government. Here are all the good things that we do. We're disciplined, we don't run deficits, etc., and then have the other governments start to emulate your behavior.
Well, I think, no one has a monopoly on good ideas, and there's something to be learned from each level of government. All levels of government have something to offer, but quite often the narrative coming out, and it's because we are so open and transparent. You see the warts in real time at the municipal level. And so it gets scrutinized and dissected. Right. And as someone who believes in democracy, I think that's a good thing. I may not like it on a daily basis because you're subject to that personal scrutiny, but that's okay. It leads to better government. And I'd like to see that level of openness and transparency, our open data, open government initiatives at provincial levels, especially, as well as at the federal level. But my comments aren't intended to criticize. It's just we have something to offer. And one thing that we can learn and benefit from at other levels of government is the ability to come up with progressive taxation. I don't actually even want more money, even if it was initially revenue neutral, but position the municipality to focus on the things that our residents expect us to focus on: job creation, economic growth, and development. Municipalities as structures are not structured to care about that the way that they should, because we are structured to focus on new development, and in many cases new sprawl, because that's how you generate revenues. And so if you want to change behavior, have skin in the game on economic growth and job creation, and municipalities will change their behavior and focus on the things that the job creators in the economy want us to focus on. We will, because we'll have a vested interest with them on the recovery of a pandemic, for example, so that we are really focusing on job creation.
Joe and Jill Public, Canadian, have no idea which level of government provides which service. Like, we kind of have a hunch. We know that education is provincial, and we know that health's provincial, and we know that the army and that is the federal government. But sometimes we have no idea who actually is paying for things, right? So let's just riff on this for a second around your dependency on the property tax. People and how it's inelastic and it's not based on growth. The other dilemma, it speaks to the second point you meant about liquidity. We have a project we've just kicked off here at CUI called Bring Back Main Street. And one of the great challenges that that independent businesses have is the burden of property tax that it puts on them operating on a main street, and as all sorts of other uses going around them, before you know it, the value of the building is being changed, or the municipality, because it hasn't got any other choices, starts to put pressure on the property tax and puts the business out. So what are the alternatives to that? When you suggest a growth tax, I'm sure people are frightened by that. Are they? What kind of reaction did you get at council?
Well, it's an easy thing to dismiss, because if you just want to say, well, we don't want new taxes.
Right.
But I mean, the reality is it's not about new taxes, it's about smart taxes. And property taxes are a dumb form of taxation. They're really just, they're dumb. You know, you want to improve your home, you want to invest in hiring people to make your home a greater value. Well, we're going to come after you and we're going to penalize you for that. We're going to increase your assessment. So, you know, if we, you look at, I mean, the examples I cite often are PST, GST. If you're spending more, you're going to pay more. If you have more, income taxes are ones that can be tweaked as they are in terms of income levels. So it is a much more progressive form of taxation than property taxes. And
it's
so
fairer. It's fairer. But here's a question, Mayor Bowman. What happens if it's not growing? What happens if you're a municipality that doesn't actually have any growth? Then you're not. So that's the trade-off, right?
Yeah. And that's a legitimate public policy argument. But if it's so good, then why don't other levels of government have it? I mean, and it can't be.
They wouldn't dare, probably, but.
And it can't be looked in isolation too, because some of the other levers and flexibility would be needed to address the concern. You are right, as there's economic downturns, there is some stability in property taxes for municipal government. But at the same time, so I'm not saying you completely would eliminate it. Perhaps it's a bit of a balance, but like have some skin in the game for economic growth. Just have some. And do it in a way like if I got my hope that there was some form of growth tax involved, I would actually want to reduce the property taxes at a rate that would create a revenue neutrality coming out of the gate for the municipal government. But you're then structuring it for decades so that the municipal governments now start really looking at things that they should be working on to a much greater extent in collaboration with industry and with other levels of government. And then that's a game changer. Our provincial government uses language that they want to be the most improved province in the country. And that's great. That's something as Canadians, we should all want our provincial governments to do that. Well, one of the ways you do that, in our case, the vast majority of Manitobans live in Winnipeg. So if you want to be most improved, let's have the most improved revenue model, a smart revenue model that makes sense. And there's an opportunity there.
I mean, the other thing is, this story about levers, you don't have as many levers as you'd like to have. And presumably as a mayor, you want to have the most sustainable growth. You want to have green growth. Would this be a way for you? Would you have then more capacity to influence the kind of growth, intensification, environmentally better planning, less sprawl? Do you think it would empower you to do more of that, provide more leadership on that?
It might. I think the density argument would be the strongest, because we absolutely could focus on on the kinds of business activities that are smart. And we know green technologies and green investments pay dividends in the long run. So and we know they're generating wealth right now. Right now, the incentive though for municipalities, everybody can talk a big game, but at the end of the day, that suburban sprawl, the new developments is what drives coffers, and those are coffers that are needed to provide essential services. I mean, clean, safe drinking water, garbage pickup. I mean, combined sewer overflow conversions. I mean, all of these things cost money. So the question just is the how you collect it. Is it a smart form of taxation or a dumb form of taxation? And if it's good enough for other levels of government, let's at least, and I'm not asking for a specific model right now. I'm just asking for a commitment from our provincial government. Commit to having that conversation and implement something, and we'll work we'll work with them. We can study, you know, what's being used around the world. I'm sure there's people here who have studied this, who have thoughts on what would be smarter forms, and I'd welcome your input on that, because I don't have a monopoly on good ideas, but I just, mayor after mayor after mayor pushes for, it's been called a New Deal, it's been called many things here in Winnipeg and in Manitoba, and I hear it from mayors across Canada. We all know our tools are antiquated, and yet we just keep talking about it, because we need one provincial government to really say, you know what, we're going to fix this. We're going to actually lead this, and I guarantee you the outcomes will be better for the people that we serve. But it takes political courage, and it means reducing your own political influence. In our case, I mean, other levels of government have, when they've got the financial tools, they get the announceables and the ribbon cuttings, and that's a big part of politics. And I give all the ribbon cuttings away. We don't need those. We just want results.
It's hard to imagine that a federal government that's being inundated with request after request after request, and it's been basically announcing. And as you suggest, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has come through with a proposal that's in the billions, multiple billions. It's hard to imagine that the federal government wouldn't be supportive and interested in this new conversation, a renewed conversation, and how our province is going to come to terms with this. The other thing is that, of course, you, not only do most Manitobans live in Winnipeg, but most of the GDP in Manitoba is generated out of Winnipeg, right? So let's talk a little bit about the liquidity piece for businesses. Yeah. What are you hearing there? What are your businesses telling you? And what is it? They've had a lot of federal support. They're getting some provincial support. What do you, as the mayor, anticipate is going to be your level of continued support for them? What do you think? And what are they going to need?
We join municipalities across Canada in allowing businesses to defer paying their business and their property taxes. And so we could do that. We did it for 3 months. So we won't come after people to collect interest if they don't make those payments. Beyond that, most of the support has been from the federal and from the provincial governments, and they have been stepping up. Of course, I'm joining other mayors. We're advocating for more support all the time, especially from our provincial government. But they have to be fair, they have been stepping up. I think what it's really just exposed is just that liquidity issue that you see in businesses. And so I cited the restaurants because I heard very early from restaurants in particular that they needed that cash flow. The leniency that's required from landlords in terms of commercial leases and things like that, that's been a bit hit and miss. We've heard good stories and bad stories about that. Yeah. Now we opened, to our surprise, last Monday, the province announced that patios could be open, not full, restaurants. And so we worked over a weekend, what can take sometimes up to 6 weeks to get a patio license. We actually had to do it over a weekend. So anybody wanted to open on Monday. On Friday, we were working on a process to allow you just to be able to go ahead with it. So our public service hit it out of the park, and within about a day, they had produced a new innovative way to allow for temporary new patios for restaurants.
Great.
And so that's a level of innovation, and that's what I like, the nimbleness of municipal government for that reason.
Yeah.
In that case, that level of innovation and responsiveness is something, obviously, as mayor, I want to see continue post-pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to waste a crisis, right? I mean, are there other things? Are there other things that might? We're wondering, are there certain things that should stick? So, for instance, what about your use of public streets? I know that you open some streets for people to walk on, and talk to us about that. I mean, are there other ways that you've had to be pretty nimble and responsive? And do you think some of those measures should stay in place?
Well, we created, so active transportation, obviously, always a hot issue. It's been interesting to see, we've had construction industry associations advocate for more road work and more roads. We've had active transportation advocates advocate for more active transportation. We've seen public transportation advocate groups. Everybody is pushing things they've been pushing for many years. And that's all fine. That's democracy. What we've done is most of the on active transportation, this week we added an additional 5 roads. So we've got I think it's 4 roads right now that are typically open in the summer just to pedestrians on Sundays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Mhm.
What we've done over the last month is we just said 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're pedestrian. The people that live on those roads can drive for 1 block to their homes,
Yep.
but it has been I think a beautiful exercise in getting people additional spaces for physical distancing. This week we added 5 more streets that are not normally, even on Sundays, used in this capacity. And so they are temporary, but I have no doubt it'll lead to more of a conversation about where can we look at these things going forward as well. Other innovation that we've had, we've started something called community service ambassadors. So we've temporarily laid off about 9% of our workforce. And
what percent? 9%?
9%, yeah. So it's hit us. It's hit our workforce very hard.
Yeah.
But before those were announced, we redeployed many of our staff to go work at Winnipeg Harvest, one of our food banks here in Winnipeg. We redeployed some even like librarians to become these new community service ambassadors. And so it's primarily enforcement through education, but they're working with our bylaw officers as well to help enforce the public health orders on our city parks.
I mean, it's sort of summoned this all hands on deck approach, right? And we have the great thing about municipal governments is you touch thousands and thousands of people every day. So you actually have the capacity to reach a lot of people. We had a session earlier with libraries and we heard about librarians who just started calling their card holders who were over 75 to talk to them about digital services and ended up just having conversations with them every week. They became like a care network, right? It's phenomenal. Yeah. So let's talk. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Nope. I was just going to say that we've seen lots of examples like that here and across Canada. Just the humanity that comes out in helping friends and neighbors, it's been really inspiring.
And as you suggested, you said a few moments ago, governments working collaboratively together. This is this is a good side of humanity that we're all enjoying. I think a lot of us are going to be sorry.
We need more of that.
Yeah, we're going to be sorry when all that goodwill goes away. Let's finish on the vulnerable population piece. So that was the first point you mentioned, that all the vulnerabilities and the people that are vulnerable in these systems, that's really been much more tragic and more difficult, we know. So do you want to talk a little bit about housing, for instance? Do you think through COVID, are we going to be able to emerge with a renewed approach or new tools to address housing? I'm going to pick that one, but there may be others you want to highlight.
I think what we're seeing local industry, for instance, with containers here in Manitoba, step up and help offer support. We are unique. We're not like other municipalities where housing is one of our areas of jurisdiction in Manitoba. It's provincial, so we're not as, if I talk to Kennedy in Vancouver or John in Toronto, Bonnie in Mississauga. I mean, we talk to many of the mayors. They're much more hands-on when it comes to housing. But what we've seen here is we've seen the network and the ecosystem of support that is there. We've seen it strengthened through organizations, in our case, like End Homelessness Winnipeg. Our Emergency Operations Center early on in the pandemic reached out to make sure that coordination was happening and that almost daily dialogue is happening. And what it actually resulted in is me being more of an advocate to other levels of government to get the support to come in a much more timely way. Where it's been really acute for me is those with addictions. I like other mayors, I'm tweeting out a lot about physical distancing. My tweets are not going to influence somebody who is living with an addiction. That addiction is going to win out. And if they have COVID, that's going to win out. And so that's been really impressed upon me. Rick Lees is a community leader here in Winnipeg. He runs the Main Street Project. I've had some really good conversations with him over the last month or two.
Mm-hmm.
just about the practical application of quarantining and self-isolation with the citizens and the clients that he serves. And I hope that that level of empathy that you need to have at all three levels of government
Mm-hmm.
continues to grow, and the supports follow. Time will tell, but I do think the physical distancing, you can't jam people in like sardines. That we won't go back to that. We can't go back to that. So I think the supports for housing, obviously for affordable housing, as well as the shelter systems, is going to be key moving forward. And that's where I think policymakers are going to be shifting, if they haven't already, to the long term, the new norm. That's really where our headspace should be right now.
Yeah, addressing the precariousness, precarious work, precarious housing. We had Jay Pitter with us a couple of weeks ago, and she made this very strong point that there are forgotten densities in communities across the country where the proximity, the people do not have options to go, and they cannot physically distance. And as you suggest, mental health challenges, all sorts of other things. You've got a growing population in Winnipeg, and as you suggest, you have the largest concentration of Indigenous. Do you see this as kind of positioning you as having some unique assets that are going to help you emerge from this?
Well, we are growing. Before I was elected, we were at 698,000. We're pushing 800,000 now. We've grown
fantastic.
at a rate we haven't experienced since the 1950s. And so, 90s, we had a couple of years where we were losing residents, like net resident losses. And so we've been growing for many years, and I'm really proud of that. We're becoming more Indigenous by the day. I'm Métis and very proud to be Indigenous, and we got a lot of First Nations that call Winnipeg home, and as well as Inuit. And I think the sad vulnerability of the demographic, though. We know from looking at our statistics that a disproportionate number of Indigenous people in Winnipeg and in communities across Canada are they don't have the same. They're not in the same situation as the other demographics. So that vulnerability is a particular concern to me right now, because we're not through the storm. I think what we are doing, I created an Indigenous advisory circle, and I'm increasingly relying on the wisdom of our elders and the knowledge that they have to help guide us moving forward, and to see what changes we need to make that we should have made many, many years ago. I think that wisdom resides in our elders across Canada. So that's a takeaway for me, that I've been leaning on them a little bit more, and will do so going forward.
That phrase, teachable moment. We say it feels like COVID has provided us with so many teachable moments, so many COVID moments. And as you just suggested, elders, of course, are at greater risk of contracting COVID. It's an unbelievable rupture to the continuity of life that a particular demographic has been so hard hit by this. And how are we going to come to terms with that, as you suggest? Yeah.
It's been teachable moments for parents. So the parents that are here, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we've got two boys. Our 12-year-old Hayden has been rolling with this pretty well. He connects with his friends every day by Zoom. He plays the clarinet, O Canada, to start the school day at home in the mornings, and he's been rolling with it pretty well. We talked to them about how they're feeling. Our 9-year-old has had some anxiety, and so he's been, he's waking up in the night, and I asked him a couple weeks ago. I said, how are you feeling? And he said, well, I'm really scared. And I said, what are you scared about? He said, well, I'm not scared about getting COVID, because I know we're washing our hands and we're staying at home. But he says, I'm really scared about all the people that I saw in the news that are dying. And it was a teachable moment for me in empathy. I was really proud of him. I felt good as a parent that we've hopefully done that right. I'm sure we've messed him up in many other ways, but the fact that he had some empathy, and we're seeing that throughout the community. We're seeing that across Canada. We're seeing that level of respect that people are demonstrating to our healthcare workers and first responders. I mean, you want to talk about heroes. Going into work every day in a hospital right now where you're treating COVID patients. I mean, I won't complain about the work I do here. You know, it's just not on. It's not even in the same orbit as that level of risk. And so, I've been really inspired by Canadians, and I hope we keep this this spirit going. You know, going forward, because I'm seeing stories from across Canada, and it just makes me really proud to be a Canadian. And I hope people are seeing. I mean, I hope those that are seeing some of the stories come out of Winnipeg are also motivating and inspiring Canadians to try to do some good in the community. We put out a video last week called "Weathering the Storm," and I'll plug it if you haven't seen it. We asked you know, everybody from Blake Wheeler, the captain of course the best hockey team in the NHL, the Winnipeg Jets, and our Grey Cup champion Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Nick Dembski and Adam Bighill, and many others. Nia Vardolis from Hollywood. We had so many others join us in the video just to lend their voice, and they all jumped at the chance, and they were so kind and giving of their time to come out with a positive message of hope that we will weather this storm. And that's a message that I hope resonates with all Canadians.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll post a lot of these things that you've mentioned. We'll post them in the chat, and we'll post them on social media, and when we repost your conversation so people can see that. And what a poignant thing for you to end this exchange with us on, as you now are going to go and lay a wreath for the E-Day at another moment where there was extraordinary collective commitment to address a shared challenge, which is the moment. This is yours and our generation's experience of collective empathy, as we suggested, and we've seen a remarkable demonstration of it. Listen, good luck on your campaign for a new financial deal with Manitoba. I agree with you completely that we just need one or two to step out and show how it could work, and it would be tremendous. And as you suggest, it's one of those systemic things that we really need to emerge from this, understanding more clearly, right? Thank you, Mayor Bowman. We've really been pleased to have you. I'm now going to just plug where we are with City Talk going forward, which is that today is Friday, and so we've been very, very pleased to have Mayor Bowman and have a one-on-one with the mayor on the front lines, providing such inspiration for people across the country. So thank you for joining us. Next week, a week from today, we have your colleague, Mayor Crombie, who will equally talk about all the challenges that Mississauga and that the GTA region is experiencing. But on Monday, we're doing more next week than we've ever done. Next week is like super City Talk week. Monday, we're doing After Sidewalk. What's the future of smart tech for Canadian cities? You may have heard that news. Mayor Bowman, Sidewalk decided yesterday to decamp. That has been an interesting conversation about the future of smart tech helping cities. Tuesday, we're going to talk with two former federal ministers about the importance of infrastructure investment and stimulus and what that's going to look like. Wednesday, we have a partner session with people from Berlin and from York University and across the world to talk about the impact of COVID. Thursday, we're doing a session with all sorts of resilience practitioners talking about on-the-ground investment. And then, as I suggested, Mayor Crombie on Friday. So, Mayor Bowman, thank you so much for joining us. Keep the chat going, City Talk, hashtag City Talk. Please help us at CUI, COVID response at canurb.org. And again, Mr. Bowman, Mayor Bowman, good luck at the cenotaph, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mary, and merci Miigwech. All the best. If I had known that Mayor Savage was last week, I would never have agreed, because he's a tough guy to follow, and you're in for a treat with Bonnie next week. So thank you for the opportunity. All the best to everybody out there. And if anything I said today seemed like a good idea or a bad idea, and you have feedback, my email is mayorbowman@winnipeg.ca. Feel free to send me some feedback, or through the Canadian Urban Institute. I'd welcome any feedback or ideas that you have, because I know there's a lot of expertise on this call right now.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too.